The next part of this panel is a discussion about China's Helium-3 revolution. And joining us again from the United States via Google Hangouts is Ben Deniston from the LaRouche Policy Institute. People who've been following the LaRouche website will see Ben on numerous occasions giving addresses. So Ben would like to welcome you to our conference on this very, very interesting topic.
I'm very happy to be addressing you guys from across the Pacific here. So I just wanted to start. I work with Lyndon LaRouche on part of his scientific research team, sometimes referred to as the basement. And we have a small team. And we had the great opportunity really to work closely with Mr. LaRouche on areas of scientific matters, scientific investigations, economic studies related matters. So one thing we've been taking a serious look at over the recent period is what China's doing with their lunar program. And Mr. LaRouche, in the context of everything we're talking about here, a real revolution going on around the world, this BRICS alliance emerging, all kinds of global development being unleashed, launched. Mr. LaRouche has highlighted, in particular, China's space program and their lunar program as something distinct, as something that he sees that really embodies the whole spirit and future orientation of this whole global dynamic now occurring. And he's discussed this as really going to kind of a more fundamental issue, which is the need to redefine our understanding of what mankind is as a species on this planet, but not just on this planet, in the solar system and beyond. That's something Mr. LaRouche has spent a lot of his time, much of his life, focusing on developing a more scientific, accurate conception of what makes mankind unique, what makes the human species different, qualitatively different than just another animal species. And not just recognizing that, but coming to understand it in greater detail, coming to develop new insights, higher insights into what is the unique creative capabilities that only the human mind has, which we don't see existing in any animal species. And how can we begin to develop the types of cultures and relations among cultures and relations among nations and goals for cooperation among nations, which is vectored towards further developing that unique human creative capability. He's increasingly recently referred to the Renaissance, the 15th century European Golden Renaissance, as a reference point for the type of shift that we need to make right now. That we need a political shift, we need a change in political policies, we need a change in strategic policies, but we also need a deeper change in society's understanding of what mankind is on this planet. What's our mission? What's our goal? And he's pointed to China's space program as kind of a leading expression of the type of activity directed towards a better understanding of that deeper issue. So I wanted to discuss this by starting by just referencing a Chinese official by the name of Ouyang Ziwan. I apologize if I didn't pronounce his name completely accurately, but he is referred to as the father of China's lunar program. We really picked up on this a couple years ago when China made the first successful soft landing on the moon with their Chang'e-3, I believe it was, the Chang'e-3 mission with their soft lander and their rover a couple years ago. This is part of their lunar exploration program. And the father of that program is a very interesting fellow, and I want to read one quote from him from a paper he published in 2008 along with some associates, just to give a flavor of the direction of thought embedded in China's current lunar program and their space efforts. So in this paper, Dr. Ziwan said, China's Chang'e program, which is their lunar exploration program, China's Chang'e program will accomplish the unmanned lunar exploration task by 3 phases of orbiting, landing, and returning a sample back to the Earth, which is their next mission. Believed probably going to happen around 2017 at this point. Then he goes on, he says, after 2020, China will actualize the dream of manned lunar landing and lunar base establishment step by step. As the progress of lunar exploration, China will be able to explore Mars, other planets, asteroids, comets, and interplanetary space. Through the exploration of celestial bodies of the solar system, it will drive toward the innovation and advancement of aerospace science and technology, improve the development of high and new technologies, serve economic growth and sustainable development of human society. China's lunar exploration program will make significant contributions to a great renaissance of the Chinese nation. So what we're seeing now is kind of, as was stated there, not all of these steps have been necessarily officially declared in terms of any time frames or dates. But what we're seeing now with the current program is the precursor to a likely an intention to send people back to the moon. But then also an intention, as he says here, to build habitation, to build settlements, to build bases. And to use those as a basing operation to further our expanse out into the solar system. Now, he is also a proponent and has many times spoken of the great potential of developing the resources from the moon. And in particular, the fusion fuel resources. Specifically, a certain type of helium that is very, very, very rare on Earth, but is rather abundant on the moon, the isotope of helium-3. It's a certain type of helium which is not the type you would get in a balloon on Earth. But it's a type of helium isotope that can be used for a very what you call a second generation or an advanced fusion reaction. And at one point, speaking of the interest for helium-3, Ouyang Ziwan said, when obtaining nuclear power from helium-3 becomes a reality, the lunar resources can be used to generate electricity for more than 10,000 years for the entire Earth. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the helium-3 resources available on the moon. I mean, 10,000 years is not even something you can even really contemplate. We have no idea where mankind will be in 10,000 years, especially if we continue the current process of development initiated by this BRICS orientation, and we can make it through this collapse of this British system. But to get at this helium-3 issue, so fusion is the most powerful energy source, power source that we currently know of. And helium, and it can be done with various types of fuel, some of which are available on Earth. Helium-3, this particular type of helium, which is very abundant all over the moon, allows for the potential for an advanced type of fusion reaction, which allows for a much more efficient conversion of the energy of the fusion reaction into electricity. And it would enable enable us to skip what we currently do for most of our power generation, which is use a fuel, combust a fuel, generate heat, use that heat to generate steam, to spin a turbine, to generate electricity. There's potentials with these advanced fusion fuels to directly generate electricity from the process of the fusion reaction itself, from the activity of the plasma, the fusion reaction more directly. So this enables not just fusion power, but helium-3 enables kind of a second generation advanced fusion reaction, which would completely revolutionize our ability to, which I'm going to get into, completely revolutionize our activity as a species, just to put it bluntly. So to put this into context, one thing that Mr. LaRouche has pointed to is looking at the evolution of human societies from the standpoint of the qualitative shifts in power sources and what he calls energy flux density. And this is something we've studied in some of our work. For example, I've done studies looking at the history of the United States and looking at the qualitative transitions of the U.S. economy, moving from a predominantly wood-based economy to then an economy dependent upon coal, moving to then to a petroleum and natural gas-based economy, and then to the potentials of nuclear power, which has been largely halted in the United States, but has much greater potential. And what you see with these transitions historically is that the power per capita, the energy per person of the total economy increases with each of these steps. You get these qualitative increases in the energy flux density of the economy as a whole, which has been a driving force in creating real economic growth, allowing us to transition to new resource bases, develop new resources, develop new modes of production, which couldn't exist in the lower system. So the point is, what we're looking at with fusion power, and ideally helium-3 fusion technologies, is the next stage in the natural qualitative advance of mankind. That this is the process that really characterizes mankind's progress. As Dennis was saying towards the end of his remarks, this is real economics, studying how it is that the human species qualitatively supersedes and transcends its previous state, its previous potentials, and going into a qualitatively higher level. Today, that means nuclear power and especially fusion technologies. That if you look at the history of mankind's progress and these transitions from like wood to coal to fossil fuels to nuclear fission, the next step, in the process of further utilizing nuclear power, nuclear fission, the next step for mankind, not just something that we can choose to do, but what is inherently the next step to take, is going to a fusion economy, fusion technologies. Now, one way you can begin to understand the differences between these types of fuel sources is comparing the energy density of different fuel types. So one way you could look at it is you could say, what's the amount of energy in a given weight of fuel, comparing, say, gasoline to nuclear fuel, or to have the same, or to put it another way, to have the same amount of energy, how much fuel do you need of different types? And nuclear fuels, like fission, like fusion, are generally 1 million times or over 1 million times more energy dense than chemical reactions. And because that's kind of a difficult thing to conceptualize, a million-fold difference, I pulled together one example, which is kind of a variation of a study I had done for the situation in the western United States. But to try and give a little bit of a pedagogical picture of what a million-fold increase in energy density is, I decided to look at the situation with the water needs and the water situation in Australia. And I pulled together a quick example. And this is something that I know is obviously an issue over there. It's an issue here in the United States as well, the need for water. And we have a problem in the United States with people saying that, well, there's a finite amount of resources. If we can't get by with we can't use up this fixed amount of resources. We can't draw down our resources to the point where we have nothing left. We have to learn how to conserve with less. We have to learn how to utilize less. And it's this very backwards mentality that's been a driving factor in the economic decline of the United States. Where in reality, with this type of qualitative transitions of human progress that I'm describing, mankind creates new resources. Mankind creates new resource bases. So again, take this water issue. Water is inherently a renewable resource. When we use water, it doesn't no longer become water. If we use water to water our crops, it's still water. When we consume water, it's still water, unless there's a chemical reaction occurring, something like plants utilizing it for photosynthesis. Water is constantly cycling in and out of various systems, various forms. Most of what we depend upon currently is the water that gets evaporated by the sun, by solar radiation, enters the atmosphere as water vapor, and then falls as rainfall or snowfall over an area, over a continent or a territory, and then gets utilized on that territory, and then runs back off into the ocean again to begin that cycle again. So it's inherently a cyclical process, a renewable process. For fun today, I just pulled up what I could find for the figures for that cycle for Australia as a whole. There might be various different estimates. I found a figure of about 570 cubic kilometers per year. Don't worry if that number doesn't mean much, but that's the amount of annual runoff from Australian rivers back into the ocean, which is one measure of this cycle of evaporation, precipitation, runoff. So you have something on the order of 570 cubic kilometers per year of flux of water into Australia, utilized on the continent, and then flowing back into the ocean. So that's a cycle of water supply that the people of Australia depend upon. Now, in a fusion economy, we don't have to limit ourselves to simply relying upon that natural cycle as it currently exists. We already have technologies to remove salt and purify ocean water through desalination and begin to create our own resources of fresh water for our own use. In effect, it's kind of like taking over for the role of the sun. We can begin to create our own cycles. And again, this is not just, using up some finite resource. We can take in ocean water instead of the sunlight evaporating it and turning it into fresh water. We can turn it into fresh water ourselves. We can desalinate it. We can bring it inland. We can use it for crops. We can use it for irrigation. We can use it for economic activity. It can flow back out into the ocean again when we're done. We can create our own cycles of activity. Now, for fun, to get back to this issue of fusion and energy density, I thought it would be interesting to look up how much helium-3 would be needed to match the entire continental water cycle for Australia. So how much helium-3 fuel, how much energy would we need to produce with helium-3 in order to desalinate enough water, 570 cubic kilometers? And this is kind of just a fun exercise. This is a huge amount of activity here. This is a vast amount of water. So I'm not necessarily proposing we do exactly this, but just to give a sense of the scale of activity mankind could achieve with this type of fusion level economy. If we were to match the water cycle of the continent of Australia with fusion power, it would take about 25 tons of helium-3 per year. Now that could fit in the bay, the cargo bay of one of our former space shuttles. You know, that's not necessarily a huge amount of fuel. If you have a conception of how much water that is, that's not necessarily a lot of fuel. So one it could probably fit also in one rail car for a train. So one rail car, one space shuttle load of helium-3 from the moon per year could allow mankind to create his own water cycle matching the current natural water cycle of Australia. Again, just kind of a fun exercise. Now, what if you were to try and do this with coal? We could desalinate ocean water with coal. You could use coal to generate electricity to power desalination, the same way you use fusion to generate electricity to power desalination. You still use electricity either way. But with coal, it would take not 25 tons, it would take 530 million tons of coal. That would be, the helium-3 would fit into one rail car. 530 million tons of coal, if you were to put that into rail cars, would wrap around the entirety of the coast of Australia 3.5 times. So when you're talking about a million-fold difference in energy density with nuclear reactions versus chemical reactions, that's kind of that. I just went through this example to give you a sense of the scale you're talking about. One rail car, one single rail car worth of helium-3 fuel versus enough rail cars to wrap around the entire coast of all of Australia 3.5 times. So just to give a sense of why fusion, the energy density of fusion is so important for the future of mankind. And I'm not advocating we desalinate this particular amount of water, but with a fusion economy, with that scale of energy flux density, that scale of power available per capita, we are effectively creating a new resource base, allowing mankind to produce our own fresh water as needed to feed the needs of mankind. We're no longer simply dependent upon the natural cycles which exist. So that's just one example which I thought might resonate down there, since you're facing similar water concerns that we're familiar with here in the United States and on the West Coast. But that's just one example. And that deals with a certain, this idea of the increased energy density, increased energy per amount of fuel available with nuclear reactions, fusion reactions. You also get a completely new quality of power when you move into this domain of nuclear reactions. No amount of chemical energy, no quantity of energy from chemical reactions, from petroleum or gas, natural gas or coal, will allow you to perform transmutation, to transform one element into another element. You can do that with nuclear reactions. We open up completely new qualities of activity that were simply inaccessible in the domain of chemical activity. Moving into this nuclear domain opens up completely new types of reactions, potentials for mankind, which simply didn't exist in the lower domain. It opens up new potentials for technologies using controlled high-temperature plasmas, such as things like ideally in the future at some point, things like the fusion torch concept, where you could take, potentially, to take an extreme example, effectively trash. Take trash out of a landfill. That's the constituent elements of trash in a landfill is materials that we use. They're elements that we use. That's why it ended up in a landfill, because they were things that we utilized. If we had, an advanced fusion economy, powered by Helium-3 driver program, you could be breaking down trash and separating out the elements and the isotopes and have pure raw materials and resources from what's otherwise trash. And this is something that, some people have done studies on, and there's designs and proposals for these types of systems, where you could create a controlled high-temperature plasma in which whatever you put into it, it would break it down into the basic chemical elements and even separate out the isotopes of those elements and allow you to produce pure resources, raw materials out of, lower quality ores, lower quality resources, or, at some point maybe even effectively, what we view as trash currently. So these are the type of transitions that, in terms of a leap to a fusion economy is not just more energy, more power to do the same thing. It enables a qualitative transformation in what do we define as a resource? What resources are available to us? It's the type of policy that embraces the spirit of what China's president has defined as a policy of win-win economic progress. That if nations are cooperating in developing these types of new technologies, in developing, at this point, the needed infrastructure to develop nations, to develop regions, and these types of technologies that transform the productivity of these regions, of these nations, that this is what mankind does. This actually increases the total amount of physical wealth, value available to mankind. That this type of increasing energy flux density, moving towards a fusion economy, is an absolute necessity for the progress of mankind, because this is the shift that's going to create an entire new level of potential wealth, resources, and growth available to mankind as a whole. And just coming back around to what I opened with, this gets at another issue that Mr. LaRouche has been emphasizing increasingly lately, and something he has us working on is really getting more at the science of what allows mankind to do this. Because this type of qualitative shift is something that no animal species does. This is despite the lies they, tell students in many universities today. We're not just a smarter animal. We're not just doing things a little bit more or a little bit faster or a little bit better than another animal species is. What characterizes these types of human qualitative economic leaps is a type of activity which doesn't exist in the animal domain. So it is this type of progress that defines mankind as something unique and is something that we have to increasingly respect and understand, and has to become the basis of human economic relations going into the future. That there is a unique creative potential in mankind as a distinct species. And policies, strategy, the strategy of nations has to be subsumed by the need to develop that, the need to facilitate the growth of that human economic, that human creative potential. And so why Mr. LaRouche has focused so much on China's lunar program and their space program is because I think he sees that as potentially getting most directly and most clearly at this issue, at an expression and a pursuit of the distinct creative capabilities that make mankind unique and must become the central governing principle for this potential new paradigm that we're heading into now.
Hi, Ben. I'm Roy, and I happen to be an engineer, and I have certain interest in space and technology. We all know that, or many of us know that the Chinese invented the rocket, but many of us also know that it was Stanley Kubrick who put the Americans on the moon. How are the Chinese going to put the Chinese men on the moon when Stanley Kubrick was unfortunately killed by the Americans and there is no second Stanley Kubrick? How are we going to overcome the magnetic the radiation belt without any magnetic metal or any other shield which will protect human beings? Thank you.
To my knowledge, it took a little more than Stanley. I think we had a big rocket called the Saturn V that got us there. And I know China's pursuing a similar path. I've never personally bought into the idea that the radiation levels at the Van Allen belts are would ultimately prevent mankind from ever passing through them and going to space. And I think we demonstrated that with John F. Kennedy's program in the 60s. But I would just emphasize what I just touched on the beginning, which is that what's so exciting and important about what China's doing is they're not saying we're just going to go put a flag there and then give up and not come back. They're saying we're going to look at this, we're going to use this as a base of operations to expand mankind's presence throughout the solar system. And this is not just, this is China saying it. China has, they're one of the few nations that has a record of pursuing the programs. We're talking about water. In the United States, we've been talking about water for decades. We're still in a water crisis. China has just completed the biggest water management, water development projects that mankind's ever undertaken. They've returned activity to the moon, and they are directed towards and intended on not just going back, but ensuring that mankind is a presence there permanently, developing the resources on the moon, and expanding mankind's presence as not just a factor on Earth, but in the solar system. And I think that's an incredibly exciting perspective that younger generations should really be fighting to make happen.
Thanks very much, Ben.